you want more of the conventional wisdom on sales and growing revenue, this podcast isn't for you. Throw away your closing tactics, tricks, and tips and learn what the top 1% income earners do to create results. This is the OnPurpose Growth podcast.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming back to this episode, this new episode of the OnPurpose Growth podcast. My name, again, is Bryan McDonald, partner at OnPurpose Growth. And today, I've got two phenomenal guests. The topics that they talk about in their business is right up my alley. It's Mark and Liz from Twin Lights Consulting. And what we're going to be talking about today is, authentic communication. And, in corporate cultures, there's been an old way of communicating. And what we're going to be talking about is, that compared to a new and better way of communicating that actually helps corporate growth. So, Liz, Mark, thanks for being on. Why don't you take a couple minutes and share background of Twin Lights and yourself, so all the listeners and viewers can get acquainted with you.
Sure, Bryan. Thank you so much for having us on today. This is a real honor and a pleasure. Twin Lights Consulting is a company whose purpose is to develop open communication between employers and their employees, to allow them to have better engagement, better productivity, and to improve culture, and therefore to just up the game with their company. As a background, I guess, I'm actually a physician. 30 years working on and eventually creating and leading high-performing teams, where cross-functional teams needed to have incredible communication in order to make sure that we had the benefit of making life or death decisions where people literally lived and died within those minutes to seconds. And communication's been a passion for both of us, and what really brought both of us together in our professional coaching program.
Yes, and I was just going to say that Mark and I met in a professional coaching program, so we're both certified.
Oh, okay.
My background was actually in theater and public speaking, and I spent many years home raising three children actually, working on really honing in my communication skills and emotional intelligence, and really just doing self-education while raising kids, knowing that when I got out back into the workforce that I wanted to do something that mattered, something that was more, that gave back. Mm-hmm. And for me, that was coaching. Met Mark there, and Mark and I came together in alignment and purpose, and we created Twin Lights Consulting, really, again, all about making the world a better place through communication.
Well, and based on our prior conversations, I know and I can tell you guys are giving back. So I'm excited to dive into this subject because I think it's really important, right? Highly important. And when people not only learn, but apply this learning, magic can happen. So we're talking about the old way and the new and better way. Where do you want to start on that? Where's the best way to start? Is it, giving people an idea of what the new way looks like, what the old way was? What do you think?
Well, what Mark and I, when we first started the consulting business, we started it thinking about what were the generations like in the workplace. Mm-hmm. And as we mentioned to you before, there is a little bit of a generational divide between the digital natives and the digital immigrants. Now, digital natives are obviously the millennials and the up-and-coming Gen Zs. They grew up with technology, and they are incredible at it, to the point where you could be in a grocery store and see a 2-year-old working a cell phone better than I can.
Yeah, right.
Mark and I are digital immigrants, so we are digital natives. We're immigrants, I'm sorry. And we've taken the time to really, truly understand that because there is a little bit of that divide, there is a little bit of a breakdown in communication. So what we wanted to understand and really come into companies to help them understand was, look, we're all human. We all communicate in our own way. And a lot of it has to do with how we were raised and what we experienced while we were being raised. So instead of pointing fingers and saying one generation is better than another or communicates better or is lazy, putting labels on things, how about we just take it all and look at all the generations and say, we're all human. We all communicate in different ways. Let's try to understand different perspectives and then bring them together so we can all work effectively with each other.
And by the way, Bryan, these are not just our concepts. The Economist said that miscommunication is most severe across any generational divide. It's not just between the baby boomers, Gen X, and the millennials. It's between the boomers and the Gen X, although they're a little bit more alike. As we see the leading edge of Gen Z come in, again, we're all slightly different in the way we've been raised, in the life events we have, in the technology we had or hadn't at our fingertips, and how we were able to or needed to learn how to communicate. So as people have adjusted, the generations see things differently, and there are obviously changes in what people expect and how they decide to lead or be led. And we have to be able to work across a fairly diverse workforce. As we were looking at things, we decided to look at the diversity again in the workforce. It was a very bland workforce 100 years ago. Most of us looked all the same. It was mostly men. It was all of the business leaders were Caucasian men. And you could say, well, this is my way or the highway. And people would toe the line because they sort of thought like you and everyone looked like you. Now we're in a position where we have incredible diversity. We have not only diversity of culture and gender, race, but we also have the cultures that we grew up in as far as the generation. Again, as Liz said, the technical divide, the digital immigrant, digital natives, and some of the learning experiences that have come up because of that divide. And a really sentient leader is able to step back and to think about the way that we used to communicate and the way that we watched others do, and ask themselves, are there better ways? And what are the tools that we need as leaders to develop to bring communication to its fullest state, to really engage individuals, to cohesively bring them together and bond them, where we have a team that is truly high performing to meet the mission, vision, and values of their employer.
So what's missing? What seems to be missing right now, or maybe a similar question, in communication that it's not effective, or what is ineffective about communication right now?
Well, part of what's ineffective is assuming that all employees wanted to be treated the same way. Because Mark was talking about, in a diverse world, whether you're talking about race or sexuality, and you can go down a list of things, all employees don't want to be treated the same way. But what everybody does want is to be seen, heard, and understood. So there's a danger in a narrow perspective, and that's the old way. What Mark and I are talking about by a new way is really saying that we have to understand that because people want to be seen, heard, and understood, we're not all coming from the same perspective. We're not all coming from the same reality. And once leaders and organizations can understand that, they can have a lot better communication with all of their employees, because they're now respecting them and understanding them for who they are and not who they assume them to be.
You know, Bryan, it's very interesting, because the root of almost every disagreement or argument comes down to those 3 points. Did you actually see me? Did you actually hear me? And did what I say mean anything to you? And it's not just arguments, because an argument is the end stage with emotional buildup of a decrease in trust, in a sense, whether it's a long-standing trust issue or just within that moment. So if we understand, again, what Liz just said, which is that everyone wants to be seen, heard, and understood, we start to understand the importance of full duplex communication. We have 2 ears, 2 eyes, and 1 mouth. And maybe if we applied a 20%, 80% rule of 20% of what you put out and 80% is what comes in, we'd be in a good position to be better listeners and therefore better communicators. The best communicators are not those who have incredible oratory capabilities. The best communicators are those with the best listening capabilities.
So, most important thing that we do as coaches is we teach acknowledging and validating.
Okay.
A person is acknowledged and validated, they know that they've been, again, seen, heard, and understood. And it's so important for people to feel that, because then they know that they're valued. So when you're talking about different employees in a company, whether they're the newest employee or they've been around for 30 years, everybody wants to know that they're important. Everybody wants to know that they add value. It doesn't matter if it's your second day on the job. You still want to know that the company wants you to be there and that whatever your role is important. That's validation, when somebody tells you it is.
Go ahead, Brian. I'm sorry.
So we hear a lot of people out there saying, yeah, I'm a good listener, right? And I'm thinking that based on what you're telling me here, that not that they're bad people, but they're wrong. So what is it about listening that people need to understand in regards to this communication point? You said about the validation and things like that, but it seems like there's so much more there.
There was a study that looked at drivers, and 95% of drivers think they're better than the average.
You probably are.
And as we know, there's a bell-shaped curve to almost everything. If there's an average, there's a bell-shaped curve, and that means that we are in a position that we need to have an understanding that within a couple of standard deviations, right, most people are in the middle, but 95% are not better than average. That just can't occur. The same thing is true with listening. And so most people believe they're good communicators. Most people believe they're good listeners. And it's the ability to be vulnerable, which we'll come back to in a minute, and understand that the possibility exists that maybe we're not as good as we think. And how could we actually make ourselves better? I'd like to just step back for a moment, if we could, and understand the real impact of poor communication.
Cool.
And poor communication really is so impactful, and it's a degrading, limiting factor in our companies, in our workforce.
We call it a corporate cancer.
Okay. I like it.
And it spreads insidiously like a cancer. Poor communication leads to poor team cohesion. It leads to unclear messaging, decrease in trust, and therefore a reduction in commitment. There's a waste of both time, energy, focus, and hard resources. And if you think about it, what is our most valuable commodity in anything we do? It's our time, our energy, and our focus. It causes triangulation. It causes the rumor mill to occur. It causes walls to be formed, cliques, and therefore this drop in morale and missed performance goals. People aren't engaged, high turnover. There's a lot of these impacts that really hit simply because we don't communicate well, which goes back to your point that most people believe that they are good communicators and they are good listeners. George Bernard Shaw said, and I'm going to have to paraphrase because I don't have the quote in front of me, but essentially, if in fact, we look at communication, the biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it's actually taken place. Why? Because we think we're doing a good job. But we have an opportunity to step forward and to examine ourselves as leaders, as middle managers, and as employees, and figure out a better way to communicate that builds trust, commitment, and engagement, and really helps in the bottom line by increasing that engagement, where currently 66% of all employees and up to 75% of millennials are not engaged in the workforce. So if you think about that for a minute, you're spending as a owner, as a CEO, as a CFO, a lot of valuable resources, not the least of which is money for salary and benefits that are not adding to the productivity of your company. They're not delivering an ROI for you.
I mean, those statistics are mind-blowing. Like the fact that that amount of people are just in that arena. And before, you had mentioned something in regards to, you have a formula for engagement. Can you share that?
Which one?
Sure. So communication,
Yeah.
good open communication develops trust.
Mm.
Trust creates commitment. Commitment leads to engagement. When you have engaged employees who are working in an environment of trust and safety with good communication, you develop culture. And an exceptional culture propels a company forward. It makes people want to come into the company. It's as you and your listeners know, culture is shared values, belief systems. It's attitudes and a set of assumptions that are held as convictions. And when you are all pulling in the same direction and you're supportive, if you look, and this is maybe a military maxim more than it is in corporate America, but it would be great in corporate America. My executive coach was a former Navy SEAL. And he said, before everything, you look at each team member and you just nod, and they'd nod back. My life in your hands, your life in my hands. I've got your back. How many places do we see people looking to pull the rug out, stab someone in the back, undermine them because they want to get ahead rather than tell you what, let's work together. I've got your back. You've got my back. Let's make sure we move.
I would dare to say that I would dare to say that there's too large of the amount of our society that believes that's just how the world works. Unfortunately.
And that's probably because, and maybe I'm not only is the glass half full, but let's fill it rather the rest of the way.
Yeah, right.
and Liz is the same, but maybe that's because they haven't experienced some other way. And again, what is leadership? Leadership is taking a vision and bringing it to life. The difference between a dream and a vision is what? A dream goes away when you wake up. A vision, you wake up every morning energized to make it real, and you do things all day long to bring it to life.
So one thing that we do definitely see in the workplace today, especially with millennials, they want to have an experience. They want to feel like they're not just showing up, frankly, I'm an Xer, I got the job, rolling up my sleeves, what do I have to do? That's not, millennials want more than that. They want to feel like they're part of something bigger. And one of the things that is so important when you're talking about communication, and what Mark was just talking about is in order to retain the younger workforce, they do need to feel like that there is trust, that there is commitment, that they do add value, that the company is investing in them and they're willing to give back because they feel like they're part of something bigger. So in a sense, it has changed over time because while I don't know about you, but I mean, when I was younger, my parents, it was just, they went to work. They worked from 9 to 5. My mom was a teacher. She was a little different, but my dad was a salesman, and you went and you showed up, you did your sales, you came home, you had your dinner. The generation today, the younger generation, they want something different. They don't just want to have a job. They want to have an experience. Mm-hmm. And part of getting that is really understanding that all people within an organization need to come together and create this trust, create this bond, create this rapport with each other in order to have exceptional culture within a company. And how do we do that? Mark and I, we come in and we do training sessions, we do workshops. We really help to see what the problem is. And most of the time, it's exactly what Mark was talking about. The company is seeing low morale. They're seeing they're having difficulties with employee retention, and it's usually among the younger generation who's willing to hop to another job for $1,000 more because, that job's going to give them half-day Fridays all summer. Whatever it may be, it's a little bit of a different experience.
You know, Brian, I'm going to take this back and just be a doctor for a second.
Okay.
Sometimes you don't know exactly what's going on. You know the symptoms, but you don't know what the issue is.
Yeah.
We have always been sort of likened as entrepreneurs to it's your baby. That company that you're forming is your baby. Your baby's crying. It's wailing, and you don't know what's wrong. You know there's a problem, but you don't know what's wrong. So what you do is you go to a physician. You go to someone who has the expertise to come in to take a look and to make a diagnosis and then to prescribe a treatment. You don't want to be involved with the doctor for the rest of your life or your child's life, but you want to get everything back on track again. And that's essentially what we do, because some people have that feeling. You know, one of the most powerful parts of our brain is not the neocortex that allows us to do all the fancy calculations in life. And it's not the little reptilian brain at the bottom that allows us to keep our heart beating and breathing and our temperature. Really what it is it's really an ability to have an emotional understanding, what we call the limbic system.
Okay.
The limbic system has no capacity for language. How many of our most important decisions are made because our gut tells us or our heart tells us? And it's incredible the amount of data that comes through, but it can't put it out into words. And, you know, we understand as a corporate leader, yeah, there's something going on. Yeah, I've got a lot of, the water cooler talk. I've got the rumor mill going. Yeah, my morale is a little bit low, but I don't know exactly what it is. Maybe I need to put more money into it. You don't always need to put money into it. What you need to do is come to a root cause and to understand and then to treat that so that you can then go on with a company that is doing what you're looking for. So that approach of having someone like us who comes in and says, all right, what is that root cause for morale for those other issues? And if it isn't our bailiwick, then obviously we tell people. If it is, and it frequently is, then we look to try to teach those executives and those middle managers some of the tools. And the tools are communication tools, of which there are 4 pillars. But they need to understand some of the human psychology, and it's not all that difficult to do. There's something that's called the Johari window. Okay. And the Johari window is really interesting, and it's a 2x2 square. They used to call it a Punnett square. And the 4 sections are this. There's the 2 variables, as it were. One is what I see about myself. Okay. The second is what you and everyone else sees. So you see something, I see something. That's the top left-hand box, as it were. And that's the open arena. It's the place that we live, we work. We go to the store. And that's what's out there. There are things that are known or seen by ourselves, but are not seen by others, which is the bottom left. And that's the hidden area, the facade. It's the mask. And, we all have lots of masks. We have a mask in public. We have a mask with the people we work with. We have a different mask for our friends, a different one for our family, or a different one for our spouse or significant other. And we also have a mask of things that we don't like to see in ourselves that we try to hide from ourselves. And then there's something that is not known to us. This is the top right. We don't know it, but you see it about me. And this is what is commonly referred to as the blind spot.
Ah, okay.
Now, it's interesting because you can see every place on your body with a mirror and contorting yourself, except for one. And it's the crown of your head because it's right directly behind the eyes, and the head, the eyes can't move in relative position. Yeah. So you can't see it. So what do you need? You need a second mirror. But the mirror needs to be trusted. It needs to be trusted. Because if it's not trusted, say, hey, Brian, thank you. I appreciate that. But, you're one of those, carnival mirrors. You make me look shorter, taller, fatter. I don't believe it. But if you have trust, and that's where communication comes in, how many times has a manager or a team lead walked up to someone or said in a performance review, hey, you need to do better on this, and it doesn't change? It's because it's their blind spot. They don't believe it. Why don't they believe it? Because they don't trust the mirror. And if you can communicate better and you develop that trust, that mirror becomes real and you say, you know something? Thank you. I've got it. I see the blind spot that I couldn't see. And then there's the area that we don't see and they don't see. And that is a really interesting area. That's the potential. And the fun thing is that we don't understand what our potential is until we move into it. Mm-hmm. So if you develop trust and open communication, you can help with the facades. You can help with decreasing the amount of blind spots. And therefore, we grow into our potential. And now we start to have development of our employees, of our team members, of our business partners. And as that potential grows, we are actually expanding things that we don't even understand that we could have been working with. And it all comes from understanding the psychology as well as the need to have trust through open and authentic communication.
This is why I work with a doctor.
Yeah, right. The doctor is in. So I don't know if you covered it there, but you mentioned something about pillars, and it sounds like that trust is one of those. Can you talk about that? Or is it proper to talk about that now?
Oh yeah, it absolutely is. I was actually going to bring up the 6 keys of committed listening.
Perfect.
So we talked about before acknowledging and validating, which is so important for anybody to feel like they've been seen and heard and understood. But then it's a tolerance for also multiple realities. What does that mean? It means that, well, here's Mark and I have an example of, do you have something you want to say?
Well, I was going to say, do we want to hit potentially the 4 pillars and then be able to break it down from there where you're going so that the people have a rubric?
Sure.
Yeah, why don't I just, the 4 pillars are really easy, and Liz is going exactly into it, but maybe your listeners, it would be good to have just sort of the construct. So
yeah.
The 4 pillars are the authentic communication.
Okay.
The active listening, which we were talking about before.
Got it.
Integrative thinking, which integrative thinking is really just seeing multiple realities. So for instance, if I draw a 6 and I show you, and I'm looking at a 6, what number are you looking at?
A 9. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
You're right, I'm right, nobody's actually wrong. So
exactly.
Seeing multiple realities and understanding that it's a possibility that what you think is right and I think is right, but let's bring it together and come to a common ground.
Got it.
And then lastly, vulnerability. And the most important thing, and we can't stress this enough in effective communication, is to be able to be vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And most people feel that leadership is supposed to be anything but vulnerable. Mm-hmm. But best leaders always lead with vulnerability because they are modeling for the people that are under them their strength by saying, guess what? You know what? I don't know the answer right now, but if one of you in this group has an idea, please help. I'm counting on you. I'm leading. I'm your leader. But part of me leading you is hearing what you have to say, hearing what you have to offer. And also, if I mess up, I'm going to own it because that's what a leader does. Because if we say every time when we mess up, no, we didn't, then people are going to start to lose trust.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Fast
and furious. So those are the 4 pillars. And now you can start with what I was going in on before if you want.
Nice. Actually, tell you, why don't I take the first one and let you come back to the listening. So again, what is authentic communication?
Yeah.
Authentic communication is where we are not only speaking words, but the words are clear, they're unambiguous, they're delivered with trust and honesty behind them. But they're also delivered by a human being, a leader who is, in a sense, modeling those behaviors. So it's not just what we put out, but it's the ability to really be able to engage, to put the entire message out. We talked before about the fact that only 7% of communication mm-hmm. is the words that we speak, the verbiage. The remaining 93% is our body language, 55% being the true body language, and the remaining 38% being tonality. And we lose that in text, we lose it in email, We lose the body language, and we're left with 45% of communication in a telephone conversation. So we limit ourselves in a lot of the understanding of what someone is trying to convey. And when we do that, we are limiting not only the message, but limiting the ability to deliver and create trust. So we are looking to help leaders to develop the ability to communicate in ways that enhance trust, that enhance openness, that, and it's not to say that you need to tell the employees every single thing that's going on in the company, but there has to be a certain level of openness, of transparency, of discussion. And while the employees don't need to know everything, they should be given a fair bit of information about where you're going, what you're doing, why you want to do it, or when something doesn't work, why that happened.
And also, frankly, creating the space for people to feel comfortable to come forward with their thoughts and their feelings. That's what's really authentic, is when you can, as a leader, have your employees feel like they can come to you, they can tell you what they're feeling, what they're thinking, honestly and openly. That's when you've really, really touched on authentic communication. And that's when the magic, as you used that word before, that's when magic starts to happen.
Yeah.
People are willing to do that. There's a whole lot more that's going to happen for that corporation. You talk about creating exceptional culture. It's going to happen with that.
Yeah. So something we had talked about. I'm not sure if it was prior to this podcast or not, but that communication is more to do with the way you show up in the conversation versus the words that you use, right? Because you're communicating way more with the things that aren't words than you are with the actual words themselves.
Well, and that goes back to body language and how much body language is such a part of 55% of our communication is body language. So if an employer is showing up like a tough person or just, a sour face or looking angry, well, that trickles down to everybody that they're working with. Even just a team member. Let's say you're all equal on a team, but one member on the team shows up just with low energy and just in the dumps, and whatever happened, they're bringing it to that group. It affects everybody in the group. So it's emotional intelligence, being aware of how you show up, what energy are you bringing to your organization, to your team, to the people you work with is so impactful on everyone else. And people really don't realize it. So if a person is showing up negatively, people take that personally. It oftentimes has nothing to do with them. Yeah,
I do. Yeah, it's based on. We don't have to go too far in this, but it's just based on how you grew up, right? How I grew up in my life, for whatever reason, like in my marriage or in my personal relationships, when people are negative, I take it as I did something, right? That's the meaning that I apply to it. It's something I've been working on for a while, so I get it.
But Bryan, most people do that. But just as importantly, and pardon the initials here, but we as humans have a very well-developed BS meter. and we understand when someone is not being true.
Mm-hmm.
So let me give you an example. We all have people who smile at us.
Okay.
And they smile. Okay. Well, we understand the difference between a fake smile and a real smile. A real smile that comes from real joy is actually called the Duchenne smile.
Okay.
So if you were to put a surgeon's mask on and cover your face and someone is truly smiling, you would still be able to tell.
Huh.
Because when you have a true smile, your eyes smile. They light up, they turn a little bit. You get the little feet the crow's feet that come up. All right. All of that is there. It's not just the lips. And the fact is that people will try to do, whether it's a smile or other body language, to convince someone that things are going okay, and they're not. They might be, again, sour, and they're coming across as inauthentic.
Mm.
And people understand that. And when you come across inauthentic, trust, again, is worn away. So you're better off either to hold off on that message you need or to own it. Tell you what, I'm here today, and you'll You'll notice my energy's a little bit different. I just had this thing going on, and maybe in my personal life, I'm not going to go into it, but tell you what, this is how we're going to move forward, and this is what I need to tell you about the company. Own it. Be authentic. Be vulnerable. Be human.
Human.
Mm-hmm. We also call it having those brave conversations, which most people are so uncomfortable to have. People don't like to have those conversations. People don't like directness. It makes us feel uncomfortable when somebody says something very directly to you. But the reality of it is, having brave conversations is a way to open up trust and honesty. And it goes back to our committed listening, which is part of the pillars. And what is committed listening? Committed listening is listening to understand and to truly hear, instead of to respond like most people. Mm-hmm. And it really, it's an active form of listening, instead of, again, I would almost call it a passive form. When we're listening to respond, we're passively listening.
Yeah, and I would even say, because I tell clients and people in sales situations, if you just have your mouth shut, waiting to say the next thing, you're not actually listening, right? What are the statistics? I think it's like we can talk at like 100 to 200 words a minute, but we listen at 300 to 400. So our mind is going very, very fast. So I like your term of committed listening. I think it's better than active listening.
Mm-hmm. And it's truly important. And there are 6 fairly straightforward steps that people can focus on in order to try to achieve that.
Okay.
And that's what I started talking about before. So acknowledging and validating, which is
got it.
We all know that. Again, tolerance for the multiple realities, the 6 versus the 9.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding that just because you're right doesn't mean that I'm not right.
Mm-hmm.
You have to understand that people come in from different thought processes. And sometimes that has to do with, it could have to do with age, but it could also have to do with experience. Truly understanding. So committed listening is listening to understand. If a person is being understood, if a person is listening to understand, they really want to know where that person is coming from. Why is that person saying what they're saying? And again, committed listening allows the space for that to happen.
Got it.
Then there's non-defensiveness, because again, sometimes when we say things to people and we're direct, we can often get defensive if we don't like what somebody's saying to us. But if it's an open, committed listening, it's being willing to have somebody tell you something truthful that maybe you don't love hearing, but it's important to share and it's important to hear. So we could use the term, what is the word I'm looking for right now?
Like the hard truth or something like that?
Hard truth, or yeah, kind of like that, but not necessarily to attack somebody, but more to give constructive criticism.
Yeah.
That's more constructive criticism. Then here's one, and this goes back to soft skills, which we talked about earlier, empathy. Empathy is something that is very, it's a vulnerable thing for people to be empathetic to other people. Mm-hmm. We all have our big egos. We all have our internal processes. And for people to understand, wait a minute, maybe she's acting like that because something really bad happened today. Or maybe, I know he's going through a really tough experience. So even though he's not performing really well today, or actually not even being super nice, I know he's going through a really tough time. So just trying to understand that the time that we spend at work isn't just the only thing that's happening to us in life. We have lives outside of the space that we work, and there could be things going on that we don't know. Mm-hmm. So that's where empathy needs to come in. And then lastly, again, vulnerability. Vulnerability is being able to put it on the table, being able to say, you know what? I do have something going on at home. I don't really want to talk about it. But if you understand, I'm having a rough day. I'm going to do the best, but I do have a few things going on. Or just that vulnerability to say, I'm off my game.
Yeah. So a lot of this sounds like when you integrate it, I'm just talking maybe not on a company level. If you just integrate this as a person, you can cut yourself a break and life can get a little bit easier.
I love that. Yes.
Life can get easier, and life, business, it's all relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are really interested in someone else, I think it was earlier in this discussion where you talked about the fact that you were told by one of your mentors, the first thing that people want to talk about is themselves.
Yep.
The first thing that they want to think about when they're not talking is themselves.
Yep.
That's all of us. We have an ego.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can turn that off for just a little while and be truly interested and stay true to who you are in that discussion, but listen and understand, be empathetic, you develop rapport. Maybe simple things like mirroring somebody else's actions, or neuro-linguistic programming,
yep.
NLP, and mirroring some actions. The fact of the matter is that when you establish rapport and you're truly interested, you develop a relationship. And when you develop that relationship and you continue that, you then are developing a deepening of that relationship. And your center of influence continues to expand. And really, a lot of people in leadership roles look for power, but what they really want is influence.
I like that distinction.
And if we all have influence as leaders, we actually not only help to bring up the next generation, but we create again that culture. The second two, and you may have noticed, in your listeners, I'm sure, will have picked up that in active listening, in those 6 points, are actually our last 2 pillars.
Oh yeah, okay.
The next one being, to have multiple realities. We call that, in this case, integrative thinking. And then the last one being vulnerability. Those are the last 2 pillars. That's because they're so incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, they need to be integrated into the other pillars, but they need to also stand on their own. Integrative thinking, again, is this ability to understand and to come from a point of view to a viewing point. Just because you're wrong doesn't mean that, just because you're right doesn't mean that I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You can be right and I can be right. And there's a space in between. I think it was just earlier we talked about the issue of the incredible diversity that is now in the workforce. And it's great, and it adds so many things, but it also changes the way we need to communicate, because we need to have that understanding that you can be right and I can be right. A quick little vignette, if you don't mind, for your listeners. You and I, Bryan, or any of the listeners that are listening to this podcast right now, we're having a conversation, and we're at the Jersey Shore, and our feet are in the sand at 5:30 in the morning. The water's lapping at us. The sand feels cool. We're in the same temperature. The wind is the same to both of us. We're having the same conversation. We're actually both practicing and succeeding at authentic communication, expressing ourselves and then actively, committedly listening. And although every bit of that is the same, we have 2 different realities at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is that one of us is looking to the east and one to the west. The one looking to the east sees a beautiful, incredible sunrise and all of the opportunity that it brings for the day. And the one looking to the west is still looking at a very dark sky. Those slight changes, even though everything else is the same, allow us to perceive that moment slightly differently, and therefore a slightly different reality. As soon as we understand that happens, and we can understand that we can both be right, and now we find opportunity in between, again, we create potential, we create opportunity for places we've never gone before. And you need to be vulnerable to accept that you don't have all the answers. And maybe that youngest man or woman on your payroll actually has an answer that helps to bring you forward. By the way, for your listeners, if they're interested, they should go back and look at the history of Lexus.
Okay.
And the Toyota Mr. Toyoda DA was president of and CEO of Toyota Motor Company. And the reason we have the Lexus is not because of all the great engineers. It's because of a young man who was an engineer who didn't have any blinders and stepped back and said, well, I don't understand. If you did this and this, couldn't we pull this together? It's a fascinating story, and I don't want to go into all of it now, but it's one that would be worthwhile to take a look, because sometimes the people who are not the subject matter experts, because they don't have the blinders, actually bring us the right answer.
So it's kind of like sometimes the expertise, the bias of the expertise is what blinds you.
100%.
Yes. Yep.
And maybe even you just take the word expertise out there for everybody watching or listening. It's the bias that you have about wherever you're at could be the thing that's blinding you.
Absolutely. Yep.
If you follow the 4 pillars, and Liz and I like to go through, what sort of happens, because if you follow these 4 pillars and you make them part of your process and you put that 80-20 rule in, it's amazing how many times the 80-20 rule comes into play.
Right.
When you're 80% certain, execute. 80-20, 80% listening, 20% speaking. So if we go ahead and we have the ability to own our message, to be consistent, to have our actions meet our words, then we start to really authentically communicate.
And I was going to say, and be clear. Clarity is everything. People don't realize how important, again, even though words are only 7% of language, those words are incredibly important. So to make sure that your message is clear, and by making sure it's clear, what I'm saying is, as a leader, asking, do you understand? Is everybody understanding what I'm saying? Is everybody on the same page? Does anybody have any questions? Because a lot of times people feel that they don't have the room to ask the question, and then the clarity disappears. So being clear is so important to authentic communication. Honesty. A lot of this is us repeating ourselves, but it's important to understand that if you really want to have this type of communication within your organization, it has to start with the top, and it has to start with honesty. And when a leader can show honesty and clarity and model how the behaviors that they are expecting from their employees in order to have their vision and their values work together, it has to start with them. So that is a key. Honestly, it's a key in any business. I mean, Mark and I are just the 2 of us, and we sometimes have issues with clarity. And again, with texting, I mean, sometimes I'll get a text from Mark and I'll say, what the heck does he mean by
that? Mark.
So even we have to pick up the phone and, before I get mad, tell me what you meant by this text. And it often has nothing to do with how I interpreted it.
Exactly.
Just one of the things that we really do work with when we get into companies is really, truly understanding that text and emails should really only be informational.
Yeah.
Trying to send any type of personal emotion or anything over a text. If you write in all caps, you're shouting.
Yeah.
There's so many things that people really need to understand about that type of communication.
Emojis are not body language, people. Emojis are not body language.
But they're not body language.
And the last point is that we want to really have communication. Again, following these 4 pillars. The third or the fourth point, I guess, of owning the message, being clear and being honest, is to create mutual understanding. And that's sort of 3 steps to do that again. Be curious about others. Empathize with them, and then share about yourself. Going back to what Liz said, which is really critical about being clear and ensuring your message is received and understood. And this, I'm sure all of your listeners will understand. But it's a maxim that in the junior, up-and-coming manager, leader roles, rather, you can delegate duty, but you can never delegate responsibility. And as a leader, you're always responsible. The thing is, though, that in communication, we typically don't. I put out my message. Now, my middle management team is expected to turn that around and to put it out to the rank and file employees. We've delegated, in a sense, the communication of a message to our middle managers. Not inappropriate, but we have to have the responsibility. It's up to us as a leader to make sure that that message is being received and being understood. That's the duty of, and the responsibility of delegating.
Mm-hmm.
And well, we wouldn't even think twice about it, about some other aspect of the business, some other process. But when it comes to communication, again, going back to George Bernard Shaw, we assume that it's actually occurred, and it really hasn't.
And we all know what happens when you assume.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, those are the biases that we're talking about. In my mind, assumptions are part of being biased, right? And I don't mean that in a negative fashion. It's just, I believe some things to be true based on my experiences, so I apply them to other things without asking people, does this apply?
Exactly.
And you're not alone there. We all do that. And that's something I work on that every day, because it's not a big deal to me. I just assume it's not a big deal to somebody else, and it could be a huge deal to somebody else.
Yeah. I learned that when I got married.
I'm sure your wife, let's hope she doesn't listen to your podcast.
Yeah, no, I'm an open book. She knows I work on that. To extrapolate on that, we grew up in two completely different backgrounds, right? So the way she sees the world and the way I saw the world weren't wrong. It's just we experienced it differently, right? And you have to, in my mind, one of the ways to survive in a marriage is just understand the other person's point of view and figure out where are we going to meet, right? It's not wrong, right? I just, grew up completely different, and there's nothing wrong with that. So,
and that goes back to what we talked about in the very beginning of this podcast, which is when you're talking about the generations. Each generation has experienced different things when they grew up, so they approach work differently, they approach their personal lives differently, and it's just based on the experiences that they had.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make one generation right or wrong or better or not better. It's
right.
Just everybody goes in with the experiences that they have, the knowledge they have, and then they learn from there. But bringing people together to understand that that's okay. Mark is a baby boomer. I'm a Gen X.
Mm-hmm.
Next person's a millennial. I'm raising Gen Zs. We all have to work together in this world. And again, as we want to do, make it a better place.
Yeah.
So the way to do that is through communicating and really truly trying to understand each other.
That's great. So, well, listen, guys, I am really grateful for our time together. This was an awesome conversation. I learned a lot, and I trust that all the listeners and viewers learn something as they listen or watch this. So why don't you share how people can find you and contact you? And before we do that, I want everybody to know that we're going to have their information that they're going to share anywhere you see this or listen to this. But why don't you guys go ahead and share that, so if somebody's got a pen, they can write it down.
Yeah, the best place to find us is our website, which is twinlightsconsulting.com. And then we're both on LinkedIn. They could find us there too. And if you're going to put that information up with our names, and they'll know I'm Liz Hewson, he's Mark Lund, so you'll be able to find us that way.
Awesome. Well, again, guys, grateful. And everybody, appreciate you tuning in to this episode of the OnPurpose Growth podcast. My name is Bryan McDonald. You can find me and my company at onpurposegrowth.com, and I'm all over LinkedIn. So you can just search Bryan McDonald, Bryan with a Y, and you'll find me. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the OnPurpose Growth podcast. Let us know what you thought in the comment section. For more from OnPurpose Growth, go to onpurposegrowth.com. Subscribe here at BLTV for all of our content, including the daily Learn About Law podcast, Seize Your Business, Making Real Estate Fun, and Logical Logistics podcast, brought to you by O'Flaherty Law. Thanks for listening.